London, 1811. The city glimmered beneath a veil of winter frost, its chimneys exhaling pale ribbons of smoke into a sky the color of pewter, as though all of England were holding its breath in anticipation of the season's first grand gathering. Carriages rattled over cobblestones slick with evening mist, their lanterns swinging like small golden orbs guiding the elite toward Devonshire House, an edifice blazing with light and expectation. Inside, the ballroom shimmered like a jewel box thrown open, its chandeliers scattering brilliance over silk-clad guests who moved with the elegant precision of a well-rehearsed play. Yet beneath the polished spectacle, something razor-edged stirred, gossip, that favorite sport of aristocratic London, already in lively circulation. Lady Merry Ashcombe stepped across the threshold of the ballroom with a steady grace that belied the tightening in her chest. She had chosen a gown of pale lavender satin, a color that softened the warmth of her brown eyes and lent her an air of youthful serenity. But serenity was a fragile illusion in a kingdom where reputations could be crushed with a raised eyebrow. Mary sensed the shift in the atmosphere the moment the footmen announced her name. Conversations dipped, not entirely but enough to confirm what she had feared. Society had not forgotten her father's latest blunder in Parliament. It was the sort of error that might have been forgiven in another man, yet the Earl of Ashcombe had accumulated too many rivals, and rivals never missed an opportunity to let the knife glint in public light. Mary kept her chin lifted with the poise her governess had taught her. A lady's dignity, she often said, is her only true armor. But Mary had learned that armor could feel unbearably thin, especially when the world sharpened its focus upon her missteps, or worse, her father's. She moved through clusters of guests who parted politely, though with unmistakable coolness, until she reached the grand marble staircase where the hostess, the Viscountess Holcroft, greeted the arriving elite. The Viscountess, tall and severe in crimson velvet, allowed her greeting to falter when Mary approached. Her eyes, heavy-lidded with calculated disdain, swept over Mary's figure before she gave a shallow, perfunctory nod, one markedly different from the warm welcome she had offered mere moments earlier to another young lady whose father had, by coincidence, sided with her husband in the recent political squabble. Mary felt the sting of the dismissal, cold and cutting, as if she had been struck through the heart with something small and needle-like. A few guests standing nearby exchanged glances, subtle, sharp, triumphant. The orchestra continued its lively waltz as though nothing had happened. "Good evening, Lady Holcroft," Mary said softly, refusing to let her voice tremble. "Thank you for hosting such a lovely affair." The Viscountess smiled a thin, brittle smile. Indeed. She turned her attention to the next guest without another word. For a heartbeat, Mary could not move. Her dignity held her upright, but humiliation pooled warm and sickening beneath her skin. She swallowed hard, her breath caught midway in her throat. The room seemed brighter, too bright, its gilded edges pressing in around her. She wanted nothing more than to step back into the cold London night, where at least the air did not gossip. But retreat would only confirm what society already suspected, that the Earl of Ashcombe's daughter could not withstand the slightest wind of disfavor. Mary refused to give them that triumph. She took a careful step to the side, minding the rustle of her skirts. Her aunt's voice echoed in memory. A lady walks forward even when society expects her to fall. So Mary walked, slow and purposeful, toward the refreshment table, hoping that a glass of cool lemonade might steady her nerves. She kept her expression composed, the faintest polite smile shaping her lips, though her fingers trembled when she reached for the delicate glass. Behind her, murmurs swelled. She knew without looking that the gossip had begun in earnest. The cruelty of the ton operated with breathtaking efficiency. Mary felt each whisper as though someone had brushed ice along her spine. She inhaled slowly, hoping the scent of rosewater and beeswax would calm her. Then movement shifted around her like ripples in a still pond. The orchestra did not stop, and yet something in the room stilled, a subtle hush, a gathering of attention. Mary felt it before she understood it. She turned ever so slightly, her mouth parting in quiet surprise. He had arrived. The Duke of Lockwood, known throughout London as the Ruthless Duke, entered the ballroom with an air of cold command that seemed to draw the entire room taut. Tall, immaculately dressed in black tailored cloth and silver embroidery, he moved with the measured confidence of a man who had never once been denied anything he truly desired. His dark hair, slightly unruly at the edges as though even it refused to be governed fully, framed a face sculpted in sharp, unforgiving lines. His reputation preceded him everywhere. A man feared not for violence, but for influence, not for war, but for the ruthless precision with which he navigated political arenas. He commanded loyalty from some, apprehension from many, respect from all. Mary had seen him at previous gatherings, always at a distance, always surrounded by people eager to curry favor. She had never imagined he would notice her, and certainly not tonight, when she had become the evening's favorite target. And yet his eyes found hers almost immediately. For a moment, she was too startled to look away. His gaze, storm-dark and unreadable, held hers with disarming intensity. She felt exposed, as though he could see the humiliation she had tried so desperately to conceal. Part of her wished to vanish into the crowd, but pride and upbringing held her firmly where she stood. The Duke broke his stillness and crossed the ballroom with astonishing directness. Conversations stumbled into silence as he passed. A few women gasped softly, a gentleman choked on his champagne. All eyes shifted between him and Mary. When he stopped before her, offering a bow both elegant and faintly intimidating, the air constricted. "Lady Mary," he said, his voice deep and smooth as velvet drawn over steel. "May I request this dance?" Mary blinked, stunned. Of all the possibilities she had braced for, this was the one she had never anticipated. The Duke, an apex figure in London's merciless court, was offering his hand to the disgraced daughter of a recently ridiculed earl. Every onlooker stared, as though witnessing a social transgression of monumental proportions. For one breathless second, Mary considered declining. It would be safer, wiser. His reputation was formidable, and his motives unknowable. Yet something in his gaze, something shadowed but not unkind, reached for her dignity in a way that surprised her. She placed her gloved fingertips into his palm. Their contact sent a subtle warmth through her, surprising in its gentleness. The Duke led her onto the dance floor where the orchestra, seemingly emboldened, shifted into a sweeping, romantic waltz. Mary followed his lead, her movements guided by his steady confidence. Their steps created a pocket of quiet amid the swirling chaos. "You seem unsettled," he murmured, though his tone held no mockery, only observation. "I assure you," Mary replied softly, "I am quite well." "I did not say otherwise." "Then perhaps," she said, meeting his gaze, "you merely wish to appear concerned." A faint, unreadable smile touched his lips. "Not at all. I wished to appear attentive." She inhaled, surprised by the remark. His words, though polite, carried an undercurrent she could not decipher. It was not flirtation, not quite, but something bordering on intent. Their waltz continued, smooth and measured. Mary felt eyes on her, felt whispers lacing the edges of the room. Yet for the first time that evening, she did not care. Something stronger than humiliation was forming: confusion, intrigue, and a faint stirring of defiance. As the final notes of the waltz faded, the Duke bowed, his expression unreadable once more. The ballroom held its breath, awaiting what he would say next. He leaned slightly closer, not enough to be improper, but enough that only she could hear. "Lady Mary," he murmured, "you deserve far better company than the cruelty of this room." Then, without waiting for her reply, he released her hand and stepped back, leaving behind a silence so heavy it trembled. The room buzzed anew, louder than before, filled with speculation and shock. Mary stood motionless, her pulse fluttering wildly. The Duke had left her with more questions than answers, and yet something inside her, a quiet flame long suppressed, had begun to glow. Whatever had just begun between them, it was no act of politeness. It was something far more dangerous. And the season had only just opened. The morning after the ball dawned with a pale, hesitant sunlight that crept across London's rooftops as though wary of intruding upon the city's restless slumber. Mary sat at her writing desk, a cup of cooling tea forgotten beside her, replaying the previous night's events with growing disbelief. The Duke's unexpected attention had dismantled every assumption she held about her place in society. It had been a single dance, polite and brief, yet it echoed through her thoughts with startling persistence, as though some silent chord had been struck within her. She tried to dismiss it as mere curiosity or polite intervention, but the memory of his words, quiet, deliberate, and unsettlingly earnest, lingered like a fragrance caught on a velvet sleeve. She had never been the subject of such regard from a man so feared and admired in equal measure, and the implications of it both intrigued and unnerved her. Her reflections were interrupted when the Ashcombe butler appeared at the door, holding a small box in gloved hands. Mary felt a faint flutter of apprehension. Deliveries addressed to her were exceedingly rare, reserved for close acquaintances or distant cousins announcing predictable engagements. She accepted the box gently, her fingertips brushing the ribbon as though it might melt beneath her touch. The card attached bore no signature, only her name in a bold, slanted hand that she did not recognize. She opened the lid, and the room seemed to still. Inside lay a single white gardenia. Mary drew in a soft breath. Gardenias were delicate, expensive, difficult to transport in winter, and far too intimate to be sent casually. She lifted it carefully, its soft petals cool as satin, releasing a fragrance both sweet and elusive. She was not naive. She understood perfectly what such a flower implied. Admiration, attention, interest. Yet interest from whom? The handwriting offered no clue, and most of her acquaintances would sooner send her a treatise on parliamentary policy than a flower of romantic significance. Only one man came to mind, one man whose presence still unsettled her equilibrium. But the Duke of Lockwood was not a man given to sentimental gestures. His entire reputation rested on calculation, logic, and iron-willed discretion. It seemed absurd to imagine him sending her such a delicate symbol. And yet the possibility lingered, stitching itself to her thoughts with stubborn insistence. By midday, the city's fashionable crowd had migrated to Hyde Park for the customary afternoon promenade. Mary accompanied her aunt in their modest but polished carriage, the cold air brisk against the glass as horses trotted rhythmically along the main avenue. Ribbons of lace peeked from beneath bonnets, and the faint sound of laughter carried over the crunch of wheels on frost. If anyone recognized the gardenia's giver, she hoped the park might reveal it. When their carriage slowed near the Serpentine, Mary stepped out for a brief walk. She had barely taken 3 measured steps before she felt the atmosphere around her shift once more, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations dimmed. Heads turned. The Duke of Lockwood approached with an air of composed intention, his coat impeccably tailored, his posture commanding. She felt a flush rise unbidden to her cheeks, a reaction that irritated her even as it warmed her. "Lady Mary," he greeted, inclining his head with a gravity that seemed to silence the world around them. "The day suits you." She offered a polite smile, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, I trust you are enjoying the promenade." "As much as any man may enjoy pretending to take the air while being scrutinized by half of London," he replied, a glimmer of wry humor softening his severity. "But today, I do not mind the attention." Her pulse stumbled. She walked beside him, aware of every inch that separated them and every glance they attracted. "I received an unexpected gift this morning," she ventured, choosing her words with caution. "A gardenia." His stride remained steady, but something in his gaze flickered with brief interest. "A lovely flower," he murmured. "Symbolic, fragile, and seldom given lightly." "No," he agreed quietly. "Not lightly." She waited for him to elaborate, but he did not. His restraint was infuriatingly deliberate. Mary studied him, uncertain whether he wished her to draw conclusions or whether he merely enjoyed her curiosity. She told herself not to be affected by him, yet in his presence, her thoughts refused to remain orderly. The promenade carried them past a cluster of ladies murmuring with thinly veiled interest. Mary tried not to listen, though fragments reached her despite her best efforts. She must have lured him somehow. There can be no other explanation. A duke does not simply notice an Ashcombe girl, unless he has some strategy in mind. Each whisper burrowed beneath Mary's composure. She felt her breath tighten, her steps slowing. Without meaning to, she distanced herself from the Duke, creating a polite but unmistakable gap. He noticed instantly. "Do not heed them," he said quietly. "It is difficult not to," she replied, barely above a whisper. He paused, turning to face her fully. "Their words are small. You are not." The sincerity of the statement caught her off guard. It was not flattery. It was not the poised charm of a practiced gentleman. It felt more like something he had not intended to say aloud. She found herself wanting to believe him, though believing a man like the Duke seemed dangerous. Before she could respond, a footman approached, flushed and breathless, holding a folded scrap of paper. He handed it discreetly to the Duke, who received it with only the slightest flicker of annoyance. Mary turned her gaze aside to grant him privacy, though curiosity tugged at her. Whatever message the paper carried, it darkened his expression. He folded it sharply, slipping it into his coat. When he looked at her again, the earlier warmth had tightened, replaced by something she could not decipher. "I fear I must take my leave sooner than expected," he said, bowing with polished formality. "Lady Mary, I trust your afternoon will remain pleasant." She nodded, her composure intact though her thoughts churned. "Of course, Your Grace." He departed with long, purposeful strides, leaving behind a flurry of speculation and a silence that pressed against Mary's senses. She tried to piece together the fragments, the gardenia, the whispers, the Duke's shifting expressions. Nothing aligned cleanly. His presence unsettled her in ways she dared not name, and his absence left questions that tightened like threads pulling taut beneath her ribs. When Mary returned home that afternoon, another note awaited her on the small table near the foyer. The envelope bore no seal, only her name written in the same bold, slanted hand as the card from that morning. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened it slowly, expecting, hoping, for clarity. Inside, she found only a single line. "I do not pity you, Miss Mary. I admire you." The words were simple, unadorned, yet powerful enough to unsettle the foundations of her understanding. Admiration was not a casual sentiment. It demanded attention. It demanded intention. And from a man like the Duke of Lockwood, it was almost disarming. Mary pressed the note to her chest, her breath unsteady. She could not yet determine whether the Duke's growing fascination would be her salvation or the beginning of her undoing. But she understood one thing with startling clarity. Whatever path lay ahead, it would no longer be a quiet one. And for the first time in her life, she felt both fear and a reluctant, trembling hope. The palace rose like a vision carved from moonlight, each column gleaming with a soft radiance that made the approaching carriages appear almost spectral against its grandeur. Mary stepped out onto the marble steps with her aunt, the winter air brushing her cheeks with a crisp bite. Lanterns flickered along the entrance, casting gently wavering halos that danced across the shoulders of guests in shimmering silks and austere tailcoats. Yet even amid such splendor, Mary felt the faint, persistent weight of her uncertainties pressing like invisible fingers against her spine. The Duke's note, its simplicity, its audacity, had unsettled her more profoundly than she cared to admit. She had tucked it into the drawer beside her bed, though her thoughts returned to it with relentless frequency. Inside, the palace ballroom was transformed into a spectacle of imperial elegance. Silver candelabras lined the walls, their flames bowing delicately to each passing draught. A quartet played a wistful melody that seemed to float above the gathering crowd. Mary moved with her aunt along the edge of the room, offering polite greetings as custom required. Though many guests smiled in acknowledgment, others regarded her with thinly veiled curiosity, their eyes drifting from her to the door as though anticipating an inevitable connection. The Duke arrived moments later, commanding attention without uttering a word. His dark attire absorbed the lamplight, giving him an air of shadowed authority, while his measured stride cut through the murmuring throng with cool precision. Mary felt her pulse flutter, though she kept her posture composed. He inclined his head when his gaze found hers, an unspoken greeting that sent a faint warmth rising up her neck. She had no opportunity to approach him before the room shifted with sudden agitation. A footman whispered urgently into the ear of the hostess, the Countess of Beaumont, whose features tightened with displeasure. A forged letter had circulated earlier that evening, so the whispers claimed, implicating the Duke in questionable political dealings. The rumor spread like spilled ink across parchment, staining every corner it touched. Mary overheard fragmented remarks as guests clustered in uneasy knots. An accusation of manipulation, appalling if true. He has always played by his own rules. It is only a matter of time before Parliament intervenes. Mary's stomach knotted. She knew nothing of the Duke's political maneuvers, yet instinct told her he was not a man to be undone by petty scheming. Still, The threat to his reputation grew by the moment. When the Countess approached him, her expression thinly polite, Mary saw the danger clearly. A public affront from a hostess of such social prominence could ruin him for weeks, perhaps the entire season. Before she fully realized her intent, she stepped forward. "Countess Beaumont," Mary said, her voice calm despite the pressure building inside her. "I beg your pardon, but I happened to overhear mention of an incriminating letter. I fear there may be confusion. Earlier today I observed a gentleman. One I believe frequents certain circles known for indiscreet fabrications, lingering near the palace's courier entrance. I cannot say for certain, but his manner was suspicious." The Countess narrowed her eyes. "Are you implying the letter may be falsified?" "I am suggesting," Mary replied with quiet resolve, "that the Duke deserves the courtesy of caution before judgment is rendered." Her words, though measured, resonated across the small circle of onlookers. The Countess hesitated, visibly calculating the consequences of escalating the matter. Ultimately, decorum prevailed. She offered the Duke a stiff nod and moved away, leaving murmurs of discontent in her wake. The Duke turned toward Mary, his expression unreadable, though something distinctly human flickered behind his steady gaze. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a murmur that brushed her ear like a warm breeze. "You should not have involved yourself," he said. "Rumors cling to those who step too near them." "You were in danger of being wronged," she replied softly. "I could not simply watch." His eyes lingered on her face, tracing some quiet revelation. "You are far braver than society deserves." She felt the breath catch in her throat. His words carried a sincerity that unsettled her more deeply than any compliment. For a moment, neither of them moved. Finally, he extended his arm, offering her a moment of escape from the swelling tension around them. "Walk with me." She accepted. They slipped onto an adjoining terrace illuminated by moonlight, the cool night draping them in silvery quiet. The distant murmurs of the ballroom faded, replaced by the faint rustle of winter-bare branches and the soft glow of lanterns trembling in the breeze. Mary's heart felt too large for her chest, as though each beat pressed painfully outward. "I must confess something," the Duke said, his voice lower, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "Your intervention tonight. I did not expect it. Few people in this city dare defy the tide of gossip, even for those they claim to respect. I did not do it for admiration," she murmured. "Only because it was right." He exhaled slowly, as though wrestling with unspoken truths. "I approached you, originally, with ill intentions. Intentions I am not proud of." Her breath stilled. A thin uncertainty opened within her, cold and unsettling. "Ill intentions?" He nodded once, the gesture taut. "I believed your father had wronged me, and I sought retribution. A petty, misguided plan that now feels reprehensible. I cannot explain the shift except to say that knowing you has undone it entirely." Mary stared at him, her heartbeat pounding with confusion and unnamed hurt. His words were honest, yet their honesty felt like a blade pressed lightly against her chest. "You speak as though I am meant to find solace in your change of heart." "No," he said quietly. "You are meant to know the truth." He paused, searching her face. "And to understand that what began as strategy has become something I no longer know how to control." She looked away, her thoughts unraveling. A gentleness she had not expected warmed his next words. "Mary, you are the first person who has challenged my certainty, who forces me to see myself with clarity rather than arrogance. I fear what that means." Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "I do not know what to believe." "Then allow me to prove it," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." Before she could answer, a gust of frost stirred the air, extinguishing one of the terrace lanterns in a soft sigh of smoke. The darkness that followed felt symbolic, a quiet omen that made her shiver, not from cold, but from the knowledge that his confession had altered everything between them. She stepped back, gathering her composure. "I need time." He bowed his head, accepting the distance she placed between them. "Take all you require. I will not press you." Mary returned inside with her mind in tumult, her heart wounded yet undeniably drawn to him. When she reached her carriage at the end of the evening, Her gloved hand brushed against her reticule. Tucked inside was the note he had once sent, "I admire you." But admiration, she now knew, was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. And the truth behind his intentions, though partially revealed, felt like only the beginning of a far deeper secret. Dawn crept gently over Ashcombe Manor, its pale gold light slipping through the frost-trimmed branches that framed the gardens. Mary wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she walked the gravel path, each footstep crunching softly in the crisp morning air. Sleep had eluded her for hours. Her mind had churned with the Duke's confession, each fragment of his words pressing painfully against her heart. She had wanted honesty, but its arrival had left her shaken, uncertain of where truth ended and his earlier deception began. She came to the gardens because they were quiet, because she hoped the stillness might grant clarity where thought alone could not. A faint rustle drew her attention. The Duke stood at the end of the path, tall and solemn beneath the pale sky. His dark coat contrasted starkly with the frost-covered hedges, giving him the appearance of a man carved from shadow and regret. She halted instinctively, breath-catching, yet she did not turn away. He inclined his head in a gesture both respectful and humbled. "Lady Mary," he said softly, "forgive my intrusion. I requested an audience from your father, but he insisted I speak to you first." She straightened with quiet composure. "Then speak." His expression tightened, though not with anger. It was the tension of a man who feared the cost of his next words. "I owe you the whole truth, not the softened pieces I offered on the terrace." Mary's heart thudded, but she nodded, bracing herself. "When your father opposed my proposal at court years ago," he began, "he did more than ruin a political ambition. He exposed my misjudgment publicly, and the humiliation festered into something I allowed to shape me. I thought, foolishly, cruelly, that aligning myself with you would be the most effective way to strike at him, to make him watch as his daughter was courted, claimed, and used for my own advantage." His voice wavered, almost imperceptibly, but the fracture cut through her. Mary forced a steady breath. "And you intended to marry me purely for vengeance?" "Yes," he said, his eyes burning with remorse. "Until I met you." Silence stretched between them, delicate as spun glass. She searched his face for any trace of manipulation, but found only sincerity, a sincerity threaded with shame. Her pulse softened, though the ache remained. "You saw me humiliated," she whispered. "And instead of offering kindness, you saw opportunity." He closed his eyes briefly. "There is no defense I can offer. Only the truth, your grace, your courage, your refusal to bow to cruelty. These things unraveled every intention I held. I admired you before I realized it, and by the time I understood the depth of it, I feared telling you the truth would destroy what little regard you might have had for me." Mary looked away, fighting the tremor in her voice. "You changed the course of my season, my reputation, my thoughts. I deserve to know whether your affection is real or merely a softened echo of your revenge." He stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance away, his breath visible in the cold. "Mary, I swear upon my honor, my admiration for you is no echo. It is the one truth I cannot disguise." She held his gaze, and in that moment she saw something she had not expected: vulnerability, raw and unshielded. The man who commanded fear in every ballroom looked as if he stood on the edge of losing the only thing he had ever desired without calculation. Before she could speak, another figure approached, the Earl of Ashcombe, his features stern, his presence carrying the weight of paternal duty. Mary stiffened, unsure how much he had overheard. The Duke immediately turned to face him, his posture honorable, resolute. "Lord Ashcombe," he said, "I owe you an apology as well. I have harbored resentment against you for far too long, and it corroded my judgment. You acted rightly when you opposed my past proposal. I was blinded by ambition then, and I allowed that old wound to dictate my actions toward your daughter." The Earl's expression remained guarded. "I suspected as much. I humiliate myself before you willingly," the Duke continued. "Not to win favor, but because your daughter deserves a man truthful enough to kneel for her, and humbled enough to admit when he has been wrong." The Earl studied him with an intensity that made Mary's stomach twist. At last, he turned to her, his voice gentler. Mary, my dear, his remorse is evident. But the choice before you is not mine. It is yours entirely. The Duke lowered himself to one knee on the frost-dusted path, his gloved hand pressing lightly to the ground. The gesture stole Mary's breath. His voice, when it came, was quiet yet fiercely sincere. If you never forgive me, I shall accept it without protest. But know this, Mary, I love you. Not as a means to punish your father, not as a conquest, but as the woman who showed me that I am still capable of something untainted by ambition. I love you with a devotion I once believed beyond me. Mary felt emotion surge through her. Pain, hope, fear, longing, all weaving into something too vast to name. She walked toward him, her steps deliberate. When she stood before him, she reached out and touched his shoulder, the gesture soft yet decisive. "Rise," she whispered. He lifted his gaze to hers, and she saw relief and awe flicker across his features. When he stood, she looked at him steadily, her voice low but unwavering. "I cannot forget what you intended, but I have seen who you are becoming, and I believe that man is worthy of forgiveness." A tremor passed through him, quiet but profound. "Then you forgive me?" She nodded slowly. "I do. But forgiveness is not the same as trust. That must be earned." "Gladly," he said, "for as long as it takes." Her father stepped forward then, placing a hand gently on Mary's shoulder. "If this is your decision, I will support it." His gaze shifted to the Duke. "Treat her with the respect she deserves, and you will have my blessing." Weeks later, under a sky washed in soft spring rain, Mary walked down the aisle of a small countryside chapel. The scent of blooming lilacs filled the air, and light filtered through the stained glass, scattering soft colors across the pews. When she reached the front, the Duke, no longer ruthless, but undeniably hers, looked at her with a reverence that made her heart swell. Their vows were spoken quietly, with sincerity that needed no embellishment. When the ceremony ended, the Duke drew her close and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "My heart was stone," he whispered, "until you." Mary's smile trembled with joy as they stepped into the waiting carriage, ready to build a life shaped not by vengeance, but by the love they had chosen, deliberate, imperfect, and utterly real.